As I was introduced, I am Nancy Anderson, otherwise known as Nancy Peterson Anderson.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Swedish in my I was baptized in this building in 1957. This is one of my spiritual homes of two that I have. This is the other. When the world around me is in turmoil, or I am in spiritual turmoil, I go to my spiritual homes. This one is much easier for me to get to than that. So it's important for me to be here and do this, present this to you, talk with you about the Iona community. Also, as a matter of referencing myself, my parents were Herb and Helen Zumberg. They were both buried from this church in the 1960s. Both of my parents, Paul and Florence Peterson, were buried from this church in the 2000s, early 2000s. I have a brother and a sister who have been members here for a very long time. This is home. I was born and raised with Paul Montz. This is home. This is home. I'm going to talk with you this morning about not only the wee isle of Iona, which is just off the coast of Scotland, and you have to say that twice, because you go through two coasts to get there. But it has been a site of pilgrimage for centuries. Its known or written history goes back to the 6th century, when Saint Columba arrived on the island after being ejected from Ireland. You cannot do that. Those Irish people, they don't like people, they eject them. When he arrived, he sailed with 12 other people in a, I almost said a wee boat, in a small boat from Ireland, and they stopped on Iona because when Columba turned and looked over his shoulder, he could no longer see Ireland. And so he figured he was far enough away. They established a monastery there, he and his brothers, and these are spiritual brothers, not biological brothers. They established a monastery, and we will go through some of the history today of the Iona community, not so much of St. Columba. The surviving Abbey Church, which you see here, and the convent, which is neighboring that, were built in the 12th century, or the 15th century. This church is remnants of the 15th century church. It too, as the convent was, they were severely decimated during the Reformation in England in the 16th century, when Catholics were moved out of England. On the wee isle of Iona, just about 100 people live there year-round. There are no motorized vehicles on that island unless you are a permanent resident. There are subsistence gardens. There are wonderful Highland cow farms and beautiful Shetland sheep farms. Some say that there are more cows and sheep than there are people on the island. I have not done a count. I don't know that to be true. To get there, Pastor Joseph asked me earlier before this began if I can locate it for you, the Isle of Iona. I'll try. Scotland, the north of England. On the west coast is a wonderful city called Oban. And yes, they make really good whiskey. From Oban, you take a ferry, which is an hour-and-a-half ride to the Isle of Mull. Then you get off on Cregmuir. You get on a motor coach and you either go north to Tobermory or you go further west to another little town called Finnfort, where you catch another ferry to get you to Iona. It really is a pilgrimage. You have to be intentional about going there and getting there. You don't arrive by accident. You are intentional about going. A brief history of the Isle and then moving into the Iona community. Columba landed on this island when he could no longer see his beloved Ireland. On Iona, he founded a monastic community aligned with the Celtic Christian Church. This community played a significant role in the spread of Christianity across Scotland and Northern Europe for centuries, withstanding Viking raids from the 8th through the 9th centuries. In the 12th century, during the 12th century, a nunnery was established under the leadership of Clan King Somerled. Both of these religious sites suffered destruction during the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. George MacLeod, a Scottish Presbyterian preacher, was deeply moved when he went on spirituality there in 1938. He established then an international ecumenical Christian organization, it's hard to say all at one time, known as the Iona Community. They are currently based in Glasgow. They used to be based on Iona, but because of centrality and access to transportation issues, they moved to Glasgow. They are still strongly rooted in the Isle of Iona. It is because of them that the Scottish Heritage Society has now taken over the management of the Abbey Church and the museum that is there. So there is always funding for the improvements that needed. This picture is of the convent. This was taken in 2019. This is very contemporary. There is no roof. There is a chapel there. The roof is gone. But there is an altar. You can still see where the nuns were. It's just an amazing, amazing place. And there are nods to the Celtic Christian foundation of that nunnery in the way that they have the blessings of female goddesses in their chapel. So, Nancy, what's so special about the Isle of Iona? Well, it's a thin place where only tissue paper separates the material from the spiritual. Have you had any of you ever experienced a thin place where you knew you were really close? Good. It's one of those things. It's hard to say, to describe it once you've experienced it, but it's palpable. The air is crisp. The stillness that greets you when you get off that ferry is amazing. It's palpable. When I am on the Isle of Iona, it is a truly thin place for me. My late husband and I never got to the Isle together. And yet, when I get off the ferry, he's there waiting for me. He is with me the entire time that I am there. And when I got on the ferry to go back to Mull, he's waving. And he says, see you later. Because he knows I'm coming back. And I took Diane, my friend, with me last year when we went, or 23, and she was just weeping when she left. And I said, why? She was like, I'm never coming back. I said, oh, you will. Because you can't not go back. Once you have found a place like that, you are drawn to it. I make a pilgrimage to Iona every other year during the odd years, except during COVID. I began doing this practice in 2015. And it is truly how I renew the spirit in my bones. Felix Mendelssohn visited the Isle in 1829. In his words, when in some future time I shall sit in a madly crowded assembly with music and dancing round me, and the wish arises to retire into the loneliest loneliness, I shall think of Iona. This is where I go before I go to sleep at night. This is my place of peace. In all of the turmoil that surrounds me, this is my place of peace. I'm going to read you a little bit from their hymnal, the Iona Community. A time on Iona often changes people. God has clearly used this place very powerfully over the centuries. The Iona Community does not believe that we are brought here to be changed into religious people, but rather to be made more fully human. Our common life, including our services, is directed to that end. In the words of the German martyr, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, we believe that the Christian is not a religious person, but simply a human being. As Jesus was a human being, profoundly this-worldly, characterized by discipline and the constant knowledge of death and resurrection. This is inside the chapel. It is used every day, at least once a day, probably twice, and on Sunday mornings. The Iona Community is the ecumenical group that facilitates retreats on the island, facilitates the worship services. They live a communal existence on the island itself. And I'm sorry the print is so small. Maybe I needed a bigger TV. So I'll read it for you. What the Iona community ultimately believes, what they long to see is a just and peaceful world in which all of life can flourish. Why we exist, inspired by our faith and loving concern for the world and its people, we pursue justice and peace in and through community. Our passion, we are motivated by our shared commitment to Jesus Christ's proclamation of a just new order, by our own experience of the common life, and by a creative spiritual practice of prayer, song, silence, and sacrament. Many of you at Mount Olive are familiar with the books of the Wild Goose Publications, which is under the auspices of the Iona Community. There are books on the tables. If you'd like to get up from the chairs and come and grab one, you're welcome to do that. They are prolific in inspiring people to be better people from all that they do. Thursday morning's word and prayer service here at Mount Olive is fashioned on the worship service, the morning prayer service from the Iona Community. This is our service folder. I'm going to give this to the people. You want to hand this one, please? Our word and prayer service on Thursday mornings lasts about 12 minutes. There's no Eucharist. It really is silence, prayer, reflection, and readings. I know that Mari, who does work with the kids here at Mount Olive, uses John Bell's works and things like that. And many of you are familiar with the workings and the writings of Ruth Burgess, John Bell and John Philip Newell, plus so many others, that their language is contemporary in that it's everyday common language. And so when you worship there, it's inclusive, it incorporates the many natures of the world, and so it's just wonderfully open and welcoming to the people who attend the worship services. The worship service, the morning prayer worship service, is available every day except Sunday on YouTube. So I worship with them 3 days a week. I wake up in the morning and the link is in my inbox, and I do morning prayer with the Iona Community and worship that way. I am myself an associate member of the Iona Community. I'm not a full member because I live in the United States. And they require a little bit more information than I'm willing to share with them regarding financial matters. So, but they're British, they can do it what they want. But it's a matter of being cognizant of how I use energy in the world. I do drive an electric vehicle. I do have solar panels on the roof of one of my homes. I do have all of these things. I'm cognizant of planning my trips and taking the route that is less useful, using energy, being more expedient in that. Being open and welcoming to all in my neighborhood as I see them. You guys here, we all do this great job. I've been present here on Thursday mornings watching the welcoming that happens. with our neighborhood people, coming in, saying, I need a laundry voucher, I need a bus voucher, I need, and we're there. We do it for them. We help them out. This is a blessing I have for you upon your departure. May the God of peace go with us as we travel from this place. May the love of Jesus keep us firm in hope and full of grace. That's it. Judy?
So, the community is based in Glasgow.
Yes.
Um,
The Iona community, not the community of Iona. There's a difference. Go ahead.
Okay. So, the daily worship that you have
Mhm.
is happening in Glasgow or on Iona?
It's a global, actually. Thanks for asking that. It's a global community at that point. What they show is still images like this,
Okay.
but there are readers from South Africa, from France, from Germany, and it's done through the magic of YouTube.
Sure.
I don't know how that works. And so, but there are people reading from all over the world.
So, there are daily services on the island.
On the island itself, yes.
Um,
Morning and evening prayer, I believe.
But there's not, are there members of the community who live on the island?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
There are two churches on the Isle of Iona.
right.
One is Scottish Presbyterian, which is this one, and the other is Scottish Episcopalian, which is a much smaller building than this.
I'm just trying to figure out how those two all work together.
Yeah,
The Glasgow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've been to Glasgow,
I've not been to the Glasgow spot, no. I've been to Glasgow, but I haven't gone to the building that houses the Iona community.
Okay.
It's kind of like our synod headquarters,
Oh, okay.
okay? So it's a place, but not much happens there.
So it's not like there are people living there?
No, no. There are people living here,
Right, I
Yeah.
knew that.
yeah, in the Abbey Church.
That's what I was trying to,
Yeah.
figure
There are people who work in Glasgow. There are more people actually who work on the Isle of Iona for the Iona community than there are who work in Glasgow. Again, Glasgow they needed a central hub.
Yeah.
So that when people were traveling to get to Iona, if they were coming and didn't know how to navigate the transportation systems, they could come to Glasgow and somebody would meet them, airport, train station, wherever they needed to be met, and help them find their way.
Well, we were there this summer on a very different kind of trip.
Mhm.
And Walt went off and did something else, and I was around in the community, or around in that part of, and it really, I agree with you, it really does resonate an amazing sense of peace, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we weren't there for a worship service, which is, bad, but we weren't.
Did you stay on the island?
No, we were on a cruise thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a day, you
Yeah,
stopped
so we
there
had a
and
day.
spent some time.
Yeah. Did you guys stay on the island?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so when you stay on the island, you stay like in a hotel or in a,
Yes,
I don't know, is there?
No, that's
do they have
fine.
a place to stay?
hospitality is what they do. And
Yes.
there are two hotels on the island, several B&Bs, several VRBOs, and camping huts, which I find very charming. Would I stay in one?
I was gonna say.
That's not for me, because it's not my way of worship, being present someplace. We stay at the Columba, the St. Columba Hotel, which has been there for a long, long time, and is right on the bay. The other hotel is the Argyle, which is, what, half a block, half a mile, not even, a half a block from the pier. And I choose not to stay there because you hear the ferry whistle all the time, and it doesn't allow that. You still hear the ferry whistle from the Columba, but it's in the distance. It's in the distance. So, gentleman in the back, and then
I won't ask you how many seat, but how many people live on the island?
just over 100.
Okay.
There is an elementary school on the island.
Yes, there is.
Once the kids finish elementary school, they have to go to Mull. So they take a ferry every morning and a bus, to go to Tobermory, to go to school, or they board in Tobermory to finish their high school education. Yes, ma'am.
I was there many years ago in conjunction with a Celtic spirituality trip from Mount Olive. And we stayed at the bishop's house.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. That belongs to the Scottish Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful place too. Kevin Pearson, who just retired as the Bishop of Argyle, did a sabbatical at Gloria Day in St. Paul. My dad knew him when Dad was there. And recently they did some renovations to the bishop's house, meaning just before the pandemic. And Kevin went out and blessed the building and the renovations that had been done. So I have a few ties to that building, but you can stay there as well. Yeah. That tends to be a room and board, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, where you assist in maintaining your rooms and in preparing the meals. So, yeah.
I understand that Iona has become a home for you. Could you say a bit about how it is that you became aware of the Iona community, how you were introduced to it, and, okay, you've got stuff to do, and how that journey led to it being home?
She asks good questions.
I'll let you know when it's, I'll let you know when it's 10:20.
When I was a student at St. Catherine University, finishing my master's in theology degree, we had a semester of extensive work in Celtic spirituality. I don't know if any of you know Ed Selmer. He's a great Celtic spiritual person who lives in St. Paul, and he taught the course. And I was introduced to Iona in that course, as well as other Celtic places. The islands of Hawaii is another place that's very Celtic. And I thought, well, that's curious. And then I had the opportunity to go there for a day in 2015. And again, I got off the boat. My husband died in 2004. I got off the ferry in 2015, sorry. And Bill was there. And I thought, well, that's peculiar. But he can be anywhere, right? So he and I walked around the isle that day. I went with a friend of mine. She had been there before for a day. And I literally wandered into the chapel. And you pay a fee because it's a museum. It's not a lot of money, but you pay a fee. And it's a museum. Unless you're going to worship there, then there's a whole nother ritual involved in that. But I went into the chapel and picked up the Black Worship book and decided, this is the language I've been looking for. I can say this affirmation of faith. I can say this Lord's Prayer, the prayer of Jesus. This includes me in everything that is done here in this worship space. And so, leaving at the end of the day, we agreed to meet at the pub. There's only one pub on Iona. So we met at the pub, we had a wee dram, got on board the ferry, and headed back to Oban, where we spent a few days. And like Diane, I thought, how can I leave here? How can I leave here? And it was at that time, Warren, that I decided I needed to go back. So I was 2015, 16, 17, 19, 23, 25. I'm going back in September. It was being in that chapel space that made me realize this is home. For me, I felt grounded, I felt rooted. My gut was there. And when we were there in 2015, the scaffolding was up over the entire building. And the inside of the chapel was also being refurbished. So the baptismal font, which is really important to me, that rite, that ritual, was encased in wood crate. The only thing that stood out was the bronze cross. It was like, okay, there it is. I can't get my hands in the water. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? But also along the Abbey Church, over in this part over here, is where the people from the Iona community of Glasgow live when they're on island. And there's a cloister walk there as well. And walking around and looking at those designs that have been engraved on those walls and planted on those walls, it's just home. And I think for me too, meeting Bill there when I go is really, really critical for me. Mom and Dad have been there once when I was there, but they're not there every time. But they are present there. I don't know how it came to be. It just is. Mary and then Judy.
The family into which I married was Presbyterian, and I learned a lot about the community. My father-in-law was a Presbyterian pastor. By the by, my daughter was baptized by him, and she had Roman Catholic godparents. I'm not sure if that's the reason for her absence from church, but it could be. Anyway, it's hard to describe, isn't it?
Very.
Very hard to. It's a journey, not
A destination.
a thing. Yeah. It's.
And Mary, you've been to Iona as well, yes?
Yes, I have. Barren, but well, when Teresa talked about spiritual guides or spiritual direction, it's hard to talk about it and explain. You have to do it.
Yeah.
And I was so surprised by that. So surprised, it brought me to tears.
Yes.
Of course, that's easy for me.
Judy.
Can you give like a minute and a half thing, which is probably not possible, about how you see Celtic spirituality, not necessarily different from others, but how you would define Celtic spirituality? I know it.
Yeah. Briefly,
Yes, briefly.
Celtic Christianity, Celtic spirituality is the embracing of the all, from the cosmology of heavens to the earth, to even rocks on the earth, things that we don't usually consider living. But it takes in that whole realm of every living creature on and up and in the earth. And it's not a matter of they are gods, but honoring all of that and bringing that in. And that Celtic spirituality going back in the ages had male and female gods and goddesses that had birthright issues, had harvesting issues. There was all those things that they used to do that. When Christianity came, Saint Bridget is one of those who lingers from Catholicism. And I love Saint Bridget's holiday. She's very good. But it's part of the way that the Christian church melded into the Celtic community is by not expelling all of the women, but finding another way to bring them in, as with all the saints. As with all the saints. Judy, did I answer your question at all?
Well, so you would say that Celtic spirit, tell me if I'm wrong, Celtic spirituality is a blending of, or not necessarily that Christianity was added on top, but that it took some things from Celtic spirituality and, well, sort of blended.
They incorporated it. They blended it.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
in order to reach the Celtic people, they couldn't throw the baby out with bathwater, so to speak. They had to use what they already were worshiping and incorporate them into their own. The Christians had to incorporate those into their own way of worshiping a monotheistic God rather than multiple gods.
And isn't it true too that it's like many indigenous lands? So this is a white indigenous,
Like Northern European.
generally
Yeah.
speaking, very rooted into the earth, much more than an immigrant nation is. So it's kind of like the Indian Catholic Church next door, you know,
Right.
in that sense that it blends those better because it's rooted in the land.
And the Benedictine order comes out of the Celtic spirituality. So it's prayer, work, and worship is their ritual, is their time. Okay. One, okay, Alan, then.
Okay, so bear with me.
Uh-huh.
So I was trying to, we had St. Patrick's Day
Mhm.
last week. And so then I was reading about that, and he was kind of, there's a connection with the Celtic and him, right?
Yes,
Okay, and then it's, as I was reading, it sounded to me like what Native Americans is. And I found the same way that they saw the spirit in all matter, which kind of fits with physics.
yes,
Fits-
yes.
Physics, he said, and that everything is alive. This is alive,
Right.
there's energy in him. And so we would say that, and the energy is, Einstein said was love, and Jesus said, God is love. So the energy, so God is energy,
Yes.
in a way probably that the Native Americans and the Celtics. But the Celtics weren't Christian, I mean.
Not initially.
No, but Jesus, well, all of his examples were all nature, a lot of it were nature oriented.
Yes.
So he was also kind of into creation.
Yes, yeah, kinda, yeah.
And so it's a good thing that we slaughtered all those Native Americans, so that they could become more European.
Thanks, thank heavens we are learning as we go. We learn as we go.
Right.
Yeah. Teresa?
Just, I was wondering if you could comment, you mentioned a number of things that kind of landed with you, right?
Yes.
As soon as you almost stepped on, and then as you wandered, I love that word wander, it's a pilgrimage of sorts.
Yeah.
And so the thinness of this place, and you found your husband there, sometimes you find your parents there. And you also said the language, can you say more about the language piece of
Yes, I can.
it? Will you?
I'm gonna use the black one.
Yep, makes sense.
And it's reference to a color, not a culture. I mean, the black hymnal, it's a color, not a culture, sorry. I will read for you, my friend, the affirmation of faith. Because you and I have had this discussion about how hard this is.
You're welcome.
No,
That's okay.
I can get through this. This is an affirmation of faith for a Sunday morning worship service on the island of Iona. We believe in God, who conceived all that is created. God, who fathers and mothers all people. We believe in Jesus Christ, God's firstborn and only Son of the earth. He came from both heaven and the womb of the Virgin Mary. He lived in solidarity with humankind, befriending, teaching, healing, and restoring. He was denied and betrayed by his friends and was done to death by the state. He descended to the place of oblivion, rose to life again on the third day, and ascended to heaven, where he sits at God's right hand. This same Jesus will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. We believe in the Holy Spirit, whose dynamic presence can make all things new. And we believe in the Holy Catholic Small C Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. It's the same, but different. It's common everyday language. For me, what that does, instead of God being a deity to be worshipped from afar, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are my companions on the journey of life. Never leaving me, abiding forever. But they're just so, they're not distant. I was raised Missouri Synod. God was distant. Jesus died 2,000 years ago. And who knows anything about the Holy Spirit? So we've come a long way as a Christian church. We still have further to go, in my opinion, but we've come a long way since I was a babe attending Sunday school with Carol's mom in the lower level of this building. And Muriel Jaster, and Marcella Day, Lynn Iverson, all of these people who taught me, and taught me the songs. I have Jesus little lamb. Right? This is a home for me. It's hard sometimes to not be able to say what everybody says. Diane, you've got something marked in the book.
Oh, and again, it's all about the language, right?
Yeah.
And I don't need to share if you don't want.
You have your thumb in the page. Read loudly.
Book 1, Stories of Creation, Day 1. We light a light in the name of the God who creates life, in the name of the Savior who loves life, in the name of the Spirit who is the fire of life. Listen to this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Before that, there was only empty darkness and the deep eternal waters. But in the dark, a wind began to stir. It was the breath of life. It was God saying, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good. There was a time for light and a time for darkness. The light was called day and the darkness night. And there was an evening and a morning, creation's first day. Let the nights and the days bless you, O God. Let both light and dark bless you, for you are the God of all creation. So,
Yeah, it's the language that they use.
yeah, the imagery and the...
Yeah.
Nancy, so you're kind of getting to it, but I'm curious, about the Iona community. I'm assuming there's some people who are in that who've never been to the island.
Probably.
So I'm kind of just curious if you can talk about like what that, for you or for folks who, around the world, like how they've, again, it seems like kind of like a supplement or something to me to maybe their
religious beliefs.
religious beliefs.
Yeah.
Is that accurate or fair to say? Or?
Yeah, and I think what it is that global mission of honoring all, being welcoming, creating community, creating service, creating worship. Sunday morning isn't only on Sunday morning. They're serving and service to the people, being the hands and feet of God in the hands and feet of themselves to the hands and feet of the people and the earth. I think that's what gathers people to them. And that's what makes it a global community, is that it's that reverence for the earth and for spirituality and for labor of love, where it goes through. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay?
And
Yeah,
has
do-
that always been true?
Yes, ever since 1938. Yeah, that was their mission, and it's, like all mission statements, they get revised. But what George MacLeod saw was the opportunity from this rooted place to create this honoring of the entire world and all of its inhabitants. He felt really drawn to that through his time on Iona, and then created this out of what we've become, what the Iona community has become, was created in 1938 out of his pilgrimage to the island. Yeah, Al.
Could you say that what we're experiencing now politically here in the United States is really deeply theological, spiritual, all these kinds of, for instance, what was it?
DEI.
Yeah, and which refuses to believe that we are all part of one another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that what we do to somebody else really hurts us.
Yeah, it matters.
Yeah, and I mean, that we are really much more, we're starting to become aware of this, I think. I mean, we're kind of evolving in spiritually or faith-wise, we're kind of evolving into more and more awareness of what the heck is going on.
Right. Yeah.
And it's almost like a pivotal moment in history that we're starting to, wait a minute,
Yeah, we are at a transition point.
Yeah.
And it is a difficult transition for us to live in. You grew up aware of World War II. It's part of your life.
Well, it defined my life.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. That was another transition point.
Yes, yes.
And so we go through these stages. I'm not a politician. Joseph?
Well, 1938. I mean,
Yeah.
the storm, quote a cliche, the storm clouds were gathering.
Yes, they were.
Everybody knew this was not going in a good direction.
Right.
And that's when he goes there. I doubt that was completely coincidental.
I doubt it too. There's God's timing and there's man's
Right.
timing.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We are at another transition point,
Right.
similar to that. And there have been many of those transition points over history. I'm not a historian, but I know that the world has made it through many of them. What will we look like on the other side? I don't know, but here's the clue. There's another side. We will get through this. I was telling some of my friends at the Femme Divine group at this church, I hear my mom's voice in the back of my head. She was such a sweet, gentle soul. Unless you got her angry. And then but, and she lived with my dad, so there. But I hear her voice now saying to me, it's always the darkest before the dawn. And so what I personally wait for is the light of Christ to come again into the world that is so filled with darkness and turmoil and oblivion for so many. And it will happen again. As we say, Christ has died. Christ will come again. Any other questions? I'm getting too pastoral. Judy!
I get the whole vision. Does the community online or whatever then talk about actions beyond worship?
Yes. It talks about getting involved in the community. There was in 2020, May 2020, May, June, and July of 2020, when our city was in upheaval, there was some significant prayers written for our community and for the global community and how do we take action. It isn't just about praying for it, but what do we do to take action? So it's not just offering prayers and thoughts, it's what are we going to do? Yeah. 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 And I encourage you to go to, it was in the presentation, see if I can find it. Iona.org, I think.
Was it UK involved in that?
Iona,
UK something?
Iona, I should know this.
It was on the bottom of the slide.
Oh, just move through this.
Ta-da! Magic technology. I think this one. Yeah. See at the bottom of the slide there?
That was that org that.
I still do. Do you want to say anything about the Thursday?
There.
What's the longest you've ever stayed?
Might ask her a question about it. Yeah.
5 days. And it's not long enough. Sure. Before I became a grandmother last year, 25 is going to be my year of living on Iona. And then my children decided to have children. Spoiled my retirement. But, because I knew that I needed to get grounded in a big way there. We were already facing a turmoil last year in 24. And so I knew that I needed to break away, not run away, but to break away, to create the space for me that I needed to be able to cope with that. Let me tell you, having grandkids, I don't like it. I don't like it. So I actually explored living 6 months on the island and contacted a couple of residences if they had room. And they had room for like 3 weeks at a time, but I needed more than that. So closest I could get was Olin, which is not close enough. Al,
Mention our Thursday mornings.
okay, I can
Please.
do that.
There you go.
I got it here, thanks, Judy.
You may have done it before I got here, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I talked about it a little bit. In Thursday morning prayer is based on, is fashioned after the morning prayer worship service for the Iona community.
Right.
And as I said, it takes about 12 minutes. We do pass around the leadership so that it's no one person leading all the time. There's no homily, there's no sermon. It's literally words and prayer. It came out of my meeting with Al over there and hearing rumblings in this community here, in this building. We need more. Sunday morning is great. We need more. The last time I attended worship prior to November of 2024 was in 2019 when I attended worship here. Part of getting your master's in theology is you know too much. And going to church and accepting the mystery and the magical part of faith had totally evaporated in my life. I knew too much. I'm trying to reclaim that. I talked with Pastor Joseph about, is there room in the church life for a morning prayer service? It can be traditional matins, or I showed him this. And he said, well, what do you want to do? So I told him, I said, it's maybe a half an hour long. It's open to anybody. It will start at 9:30 and it will be done by 10. And we will use the language based from the Iona community. So it's not the traditional Lutheran matin service that we are somewhat familiar with. And he said, give it a go. Al and I talked about, do we do it start in January, the calendar year, or do we start in Advent, church year? No, we start in Advent, the church year. I'm going to say, Al and Mary, you can let me know if you agree with this too, is that we have the worship service in the columbarium, in the sanctuary. There are currently 5 to 6 of us who attend every week. And then we come and meet in the East Assembly Room or in here and have coffee and conversation afterwards, which takes us easily to 11 o'clock, 11:30. And we talk about all kinds of things, not just the service of morning prayer. But it is, it's quiet, contemplative service that prepares us for the day and for our surrounding community and our community life. I welcome any and all of you to come whenever you can. Yeah.
We always leave a trail. If you stop by the columbarium, the readings from last week are there.
Yep.
And the coffee, it's coffee with a purpose. I love it.
Yeah. 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 If ever you want to know what it is we're reading, Pastor Joseph stopped by in here this morning before I started. And a couple of weeks ago, I laid on his desk the piece from Isaiah about they will turn their plowshares, their swords, sorry, that was a 6-year-old, their swords into plowshares. But then the next reading was from the works of Etty Hillesum and her writings about we can't be vindictive. That's not what we're called to be in this world as humans. Etty Hillesum was a Dutch Jewish woman who was murdered at Auschwitz at the age of 29. For the last 3 years of her life, she kept daily journals. We would today call them journals. She called them day books, where she, not intentionally, but through that process, recorded her spiritual deepening. So as the world around her in Amsterdam got smaller and smaller and smaller, and then she went to camps, her soul got deeper and broader. And she's just an amazing writer, especially for our times now.
So do the readings come from Iona? I didn't know.
The readings come from the leader.
From what?
From the leader for that day.
Oh, the leader for that day.
Yeah, and so usually what we do is we have the prescribed leaders in the readings in the lectionary of what verses are supposed to be followed. We have permission that we've given ourselves to use them or not.
Okay.
Yeah, if we find things that are relevant for what's going on, we can use those too, because it's the word and nourishment of God.
And it's every Thursday unless that falls on a festival. Or...
We have Monday, Thursday where we're not doing this coming up. Yeah. Mary?
Sometimes it might be difficult to make a transition into the silence.
Yes.
We're used to doing and speaking and yada, yada, yada. So that was the gift that I take away.
We do have a lot of silence in the morning prayer. It's not, we got to get through this. It's, we enter in silence, we leave in silence, and there's silence in between. silence measures at Temple. Thank you, all of you. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.